Did Russia just invade Ukraine? Russian President Vladimir Putin has ordered troops into two Ukrainian regions held by Russian-backed separatists, a dramatic escalation that threatens to spiral out into a larger conflict. Putin had amassed some 190,000 troops near the Ukrainian border and appeared to be making preparations for war. Though Russia hasn't yet staged the large-scale land invasion that the Biden administration has been publicly warning about for several days, a dizzying series of developments over the weekend showed how the window for a diplomatic outcome has narrowed. After days of fabricated claims of Ukrainian aggression, on Monday Putin delivered a combative, hour-long speech on Ukraine, which essentially denied Ukrainian statehood and portrayed NATO as a direct threat to Russia. In his speech, Putin recognized as independent the so-called Luhansk People's Republic and the Donetsk People's Republic, two territories in eastern Ukraine where he has backed separatists since 2014. Otherwise, all responsibility for the possible continuation of the bloodshed would be entirely on the conscience of the regime ruling on the territory of Ukraine, Putin said. Most experts Vox spoke to said this looks like the beginning, not the end, of Russia's incursion into Ukraine, although it is impossible to predict events with certainty. Russia's declaration of independence for the breakaway territories, and the move of peacekeeping forces into that territory sets the stage for the next steps, said Michael Kaufman, research director in the Russia Studies program at CNA, a research organization in Arlington, Virginia. In Russia, it provides the political legal basis for the formal introduction of Russian forces, which they've already decided to do, he said. What Russia does from here on out is likely to determine how the United States and its NATO allies respond to Russia's actions. The White House has promised severe sanctions for a Russian invasion, but so far the US and European allies have just sanctioned the two breakaway regions. Russia has tens of thousands of troops along different parts of the border with Ukraine. Russia did not need to amass 190,000 troops in order to just recognize the independence of Donetsk and Luhansk, said Nacho Sescuria, an associate fellow at the Royal United Services Institute. In 2014, Russia annexed Crimea and invaded eastern Ukraine, backing pro-Kremlin separatists in the regions of Luhansk and Donetsk in a conflict that has simmered for years and killed at least 14,000. Shelling from the Russian-backed separatist side of the border intensified in recent days, with separatist leaders blaming, without evidence, Kiev for the fighting, and calling on its residents to evacuate. By Monday, Putin had called a meeting with his Security Council to discuss the situation, then hours later declared these breakaway regions independent, sending in forces for what he described as a peacekeeping mission. It's unclear if this escalation will lead to Russian troops directly engaging Ukrainian ones, or what will happen on the ground in these declared independent regions in the coming days. But this distinction of what is and isn't an invasion matters, as it will direct how the United States and its allies will respond. On Monday evening, the White House issued an executive order with sanctions against those doing business in the breakaway republics. Still, diplomatic efforts followed, with the US and Russia negotiating for most of January, and European and US leaders cycling through Ukraine and Moscow. Even as these efforts took place, Russia's mass mobilization of soldiers around Ukraine in recent weeks has signaled Putin's interest in maintaining the option of a full-fledged land war in Europe. The reasons for this conflict are complex, rooted in post-Cold War history and Russia's 2014 invasion of Ukraine, and raise larger questions about the place of the US and Russia in the 21st century. The decision to move troops in doesn't mean Russia is officially annexing Donetsk and Luhansk, yet, but it does escalate efforts to pull the country back into Moscow's orbit. Previously, Russia's plan had been to pressure Ukraine to adopt the 2015 Minsk agreement that would allow Ukraine to regain formal control over the Donbas rebel-held areas in return for granting their proxies an outsized role over decision-making in the capital of Kiev, said Samuel Charap, a senior political scientist at the RAND Corporation. Today, Russia declared the Minsk agreements dead completely, which means that the era of Russia trying to achieve its objectives through a negotiated return of the Donbas is over, Charap said. But the diplomatic pathways out of this conflict are rapidly closing, and experts say that Putin looks to be building a pretext he may need to carry out a more robust attack on Ukraine, possibly going so far as threatening the capital of Kiev. Putin's escalation in eastern Ukraine occurred the day after French President Emmanuel Macron spoke with the Russian leader for hours, which seemed to point to a possible diplomatic out, specifically, an agreement in principle for a summit between Presidents Biden and Putin, after Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov were scheduled to meet Thursday. The Ukrainian army, if it returns fire, risks giving Russia the exact pretext it would need to attack. And experts noted that Russia is already trying hard to manufacture the evidence for that pretext, with or without Ukrainian involvement. Putin's formal recognition of the independence of the two breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine created a justification for a formal military presence in the area. Moscow has been circulating fake videos on Russian state media of alleged Ukrainian attacks. By recognizing the independence of Russian-occupied Ukrainian territories, Donetsk and Luhansk, the Kremlin has laid the foundations for its ambition to achieve main goals of the regime change and erasing the Ukrainian sovereignty, hence the return of Ukraine into Russia's sphere of influence, says Kuria, of Rusi, said.